This happened when I was growing up, at around 2004 or 2005, when I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area, a good ways outside the town of Uvalde in Texas. The town itself was really small back then, and not much to look at. It's just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease. It was about 1,000 acres, I think, down outside that area, and was complaining about a ton of hogs that were tearing up their land. Being open season on hogs in the south, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting for them. Not only did that help him with networking for his job, it also gave us some quality father-son time. I remember the drive down there from Dallas was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler. That car was so uncomfortable. I fucking hated it. All I had to do was either stare out the window or try to beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth. The drive, obviously, took most of the day, so we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hadn't had anyone lease it that year yet, and the cabin in the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care. At this point in my life, I had been in the Scouts for a couple of years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods or fishing with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So, after unlocking the gate, we drove to the cabin on the land and settled in. The cabin was pretty rough, dust and dirt everywhere, and flies. I remember that it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the cabin and crapped on the floor. After cleaning up a bit and getting the sleeping bags out and setting up the cots, we decided to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I never was able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount of time. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I had that feeling of being watched. I was finally able to drift off for what I guessed was maybe an hour. When we woke up, it was early, about 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs, and find a good place to set up our blind. It was the summer and horribly hot in the afternoons, so morning was the best time to be out and about. After walking for an hour or so, we came to an area of trees, lightly dense, and luckily found some signs of hogs. Typical torn up ground where they'd been rooting, so we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs and my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We also had confirmation from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was there, not to mention the gate was locked up when we first arrived. The person was wearing some bright coloured red jacket. We slowly walked towards them. My dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person didn't move at all, dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that he was turned away from us with his hands in his pockets. The weird thing was that the person was in a ski jacket and what looked like ski pants. Now this is Texas in the summer, and it was about 98 outside by then. My dad called out again, no reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnap the clip on his pistol holder. That's all we had at the time since we were only scouting the area. The rifles were back at the cabin. We approached the person's right side, and then my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed and crouched down and watched him circle around the man, all the while talking to him, asking if he was okay. He finally passed around the man and my dad stood straight up with a confused look on his face. I called out and said, "What's wrong?" He called back saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it and my dad stood there staring, and as I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new. No dust, sap, bird shit, or signs of being outside for more than a day. At that moment, I looked at my dad and could see him getting worried. Almost immediately after I felt that feeling again, like we were being watched, and I knew my dad felt it too. I wanted to start crying. I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the whole way back while I was trying to hold back panicked tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was terrified, so it felt like an eternity, but in reality it was only about 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and beat feet. We drove back home that day and didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he was confused. He said that he would go check it out next week when he was in the area. He also said that he had never had an issue with people because his property was high fenced. My dad normally isn't a paranoid person, but me being young and the least possibly having someone there we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked, and my dad wasn't able to sleep the night before as well. He had the same feeling, but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping too. Turns out that next week, he got a call from his buddy, and he checked the whole property and never found any trace of anyone, no mannequin or anything. That story still makes my hair stand on end. No idea what that was, but the paranoid man in me thinks it was some kind of trap or something. Not the creepiest thing that's happened to me in the woods, but definitely top 3. So, whoever was out there, I'm glad we never met. So, this one might be a bit long, but I need to go into it slowly, so bear with me. Me and my boyfriend love to camp. About 2 weeks ago, we decided to go to the coast because we had a Friday off from our classes at uni, and decided to hike and camp out for the weekend. We had a 3-day plan, to stay in 3 different towns and hike to each place. This story is about the first place we stayed in. The first town was barely a town. It was more like a bunch of small houses, farmlands, and very few people. It was off-season, so normally there would be some tourists there, since the main attraction is a huge, abandoned city left over from the times of ancient Greek civilization. Anyway, since there were 5 or 6 campsites available, one of which was highly recommended on TripAdvisor and the likes of, we didn't bother calling beforehand. We simply headed there and then straight to that camping area. Upon reaching it, we saw the gate open. Not really so unusual, but when we entered into it, no one seemed to be there. We knocked and called out for someone, but no one responded, except the outdoor bar was all open with expensive bottles of alcohol lined up and food left on the kitchen table, as we saw from the window, so they couldn't have gone far. My boyfriend found it a bit strange they would leave everything open like that, but assuming it was a small community with no crime, we didn't think any more of it. We went to some other camping grounds to ask if they were open. The first one we went to said they were closed because their grounds were very messy these days, but they recommended us another place. We asked them about the first ground we had went to, and strangely, the man said, "Don't go there." When we asked why, he said, I don't really recommend you go there. Anyway, the other place he told us about was also closed, but luckily in the meantime, I found a signboard for the first place, and it had their number on it. We called them, and a man picked up and told us that he and his wife, who run the place, are out for a couple of hours but will be back by evening. He said we could set up our camp and that we would meet later. The place was a bit secluded, but it was quite picturesque, so we set up our camp and left. We spent the whole day exploring and hiking around, and after a tiring day, around 10 PM after dinner, we started heading back. This is when things got extra creepy. When we got back, we found the place still empty. No one had returned and it was quite late. My boyfriend called up the owners again and said that they had decided not to return tonight, but that we could leave the money under the table mat by the bar. They said the kitchen and bathrooms are open if we needed to use them. The place was dark and the yard where we had set up camp was huge without any lighting. My boyfriend immediately started to feel a bit uneasy. He was concerned why 2 business owners would leave their property completely open to 2 total strangers with a bar full of unopened bottles and a half-open house. As we walked towards our camp, he kept subtly expressing his uneasiness and kept looking around. He's usually pretty calm, so I told him if he's really feeling so strongly about this, we can just go to the pension where we'd had dinner earlier and stay the night there in a hotel room. He opened the flashlight of his phone and kept looking around, getting more and more uneasy. We agreed to pack up our camp and leave. I began to pack it up since it requires a lot of folding and he was already anxious. I told him just to stand there and give me light as I packed it up. Except constantly he would move the light and check the area, and I kept getting irritated because I could sense his worry at the time and couldn't pack fast enough because I couldn't see. At one point, he even told me in a slightly bitchy way to hurry it up, and as soon as I folded the camp, we stuffed it into its bag and hurriedly packed our shit and scooted. He still seemed super anxious, and I told him to relax. Just telling this part gives me the chills all over again. The road back to the main area of the town was dark and lonely, and this is when he told me, "There's something I want to say, but not while we were still on the grounds." "Well, what is it?" I asked. He hesitated, then said he didn't want to freak me out. but he was sure that he saw someone lurking in the dark behind the wooden cabins and by the bathrooms. Twice. No one was supposed to be there except us. I got the chills, but I still tried to rationalize, saying it's a farm area, there's lots of animals. Maybe a cat moving around. But he was adamant it was a human figure, walking like a human would, and standing. That's why he kept checking and wanted to hurry so much. And that's why he was telling me to hush up and keep my voice down. I almost had tears in my eyes at this point, and the hair on my back was standing. I kept looking back and almost running at this point to the lighted area of the quiet town, and only really relaxed till we reached the pension and booked a room there, got the key, locked and checked it twice. I'm generally a skeptical person, but I really do believe my boyfriend didn't just see things. I don't know who that was back there or what could have happened, if anything, and I don't care to know. Dark and isolated places have always creeped me out anyway. Person lurking in the dark, let's never ever meet. Growing up, every summer in July or August, my family would get together and camp out for 2 weeks at White Lake State Park in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Some of my best childhood memories were made there. Rollerblading, Nerf gun wars, flashlight tag, and water balloon fights with my cousins and neighbouring kids in the campground. When I was around my late teen years, my family stopped gathering to the camp out after my grandmother passed away. One of the last years I was there, this one memory has stuck with me. A little over 10 years ago, I was 16 years old. It was around 10 PM at night when I noticed I had missed a call on my cheap little track phone. My family was sitting around the campfire cooking s'mores and sharing some laughs, so I decided to go off for some privacy to return the call. I took a long narrow trail that winds in between other campsites that at the end leads up to the bathroom. I wasn't going up to the bathroom, I just wanted to find an empty campsite and sit at a picnic table to make my call. There were plenty of those, since this whole side of the campground where I was heading was vacant. There were no other campers nearby in that area. It was quiet and dark. So, I chose a campsite, sat down at the table. The lights from the distant bathroom from up on top of the hill behind me were illuminating my surroundings just a little bit. I called my friend and carried on a conversation for about 20 minutes. As I'm sitting there, staring straight ahead, I see a silhouette coming down the road in front of me. The figure is coming towards my direction, where all these empty campsites are. I could see it was a person. It's not that unusual to see people strolling through the campground for a night walk. People I see usually have flashlights though. This person did not. I wasn't creeped out at this point, no reason to be. I was just watching, curiously. As the person got closer, I could see a better outline, and that it was a man I was looking at. I also noticed his pace slowed down. I kept my eyes fixated on him as I continued conversing on my cell phone. A minute or two passes, and now he stopped moving. He's just standing there in the road looking straight into the campsite where I'm at. I don't know if he knew I could see him. He was staring at me, and I was staring right back at him. He was a little heavy-set and tall. I could also make out that he was wearing a light jacket. I couldn't see much for facial features, but I would guess I was staring at a man in his 30s or 40s. Alarm bells were going off in my head now. My mind had turned to mush at this point. I'm frozen. I was no longer listening to what my friend was saying on the phone. I was in a stare-off with this guy. Then, he started to move again. He was tiptoeing towards me, very carefully, like he didn't want to make noise. He put one foot in front of the other, leaning forward in a slight hunch form. He looked like he was about to charge towards me. In that moment, I snapped out of my mind-mushy frozen state and leaped off the picnic table and started running through the campsite back towards the trail. I could hear him trampling behind me, leaves scuffling, heavy yet fast footsteps. Footsteps that were getting louder and closer. I made it back to that narrow trail. Once he got close to whereabouts I was, I heard the sound of twigs snapping and oof noise that came from the man, which I can imagine maybe he tripped, or almost tripped, or maybe got face slapped by a tree branch. Most likely, he wasn't familiar with the trail like I was. Whatever the reason was, it caused him to stop chasing after me. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running until it made it back to my family's campsite. When I got back, they were still sharing laughs and smiles by the campfire. I broke down crying and I was trembling. I explained what had just happened. My aunt spoke up and said, "Ah, geez, he probably thought he knew you and was coming up to give you a good scare as a joke." She dismissed me. My cousin chimed in and said, "Yeah, he probably stopped running after he realised that he didn't actually know you. Probably feels dumb now." They all chuckle about it and change the subject. I think I was dismissed because no one wanted the good vibes of the night to be ruined, and the fact that I'm just a socially anxious person in general. I'm very cautious and shy. For that time being, I let them convince me I was just overreacting and overthinking. But here I am years later, looking back and shaking my head over this. I wish I was taken more seriously, but other than that one thing happening, it was still a great trip. It was time well spent with family. My experience makes me think twice about going for a walk by myself anywhere. I carry pepper spray and a mini keychain alarm on me now. So, Mr. Campground Chaser, let's not meet again.